I'm Tony Jones, here to answer your questions.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali, whose latest book, Heretic, argues for the reformation of Islam and who's visiting Australia as a guest of the Centre for Independent Studies. And what about this case? Turkish President Erdogan, you've had a bit to say about him in the past. Yeah. He's actually prosecuted 2,000 people in Turkey over the past 3 years for insulting the president.
And that is tyranny. He is a man who has concentrated power. He's elected, at least he's come to power through elections. And now that he is in power, every individual within Turkish society who deems to criticize him is accused of insulting him or the state of Turkey or some other infraction, and they're imprisoned. And I think for the context of the German satirist is he was doing his job. I think satire is extremely important in liberal society. It is what stands between us and violence. And I think that the Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, should have explained it to Mr. Erdogan that this is an internal affair, and he had.
Pretty hard to explain if you saw the poem. It's pretty insulting, sexually explicit, and even referring to the size of his genitals. I mean, it goes on and on and on.
He's a comedian, for goodness sake. He's a satirist, and if you start to care as the head of a state of a country like Turkey, 80 million people, and you start to care about that sort of thing, it just shows how insecure that man is, how tyrannical he is, and the fact that because he's shut down all sorts of internal criticism within Turkey, wants to become a member of the EU, that even European citizens who at least are used to some form of freedom of expression cannot criticize him. I think it is deplorable, it is appalling. This man should be released and Mr. Erdogan should be put in his place.
Jean-Christophe. Thank you. Well, let's go back to, you said you might not, you and Ayaan might not agree on this. I'll just go back quickly to find out whether there is disagreement on this point.
I think we should move away from the term insult. And if let's just take the Muslim community in France or in any other part of Europe. If I want to address, the jihadists, and I want to talk about jihad, if I want to talk about Islamic law, I think that Islamic law is deplorable. Is it an insult to Muslims if I say Islamic law is deplorable, Sharia law? Sharia law degrades women, it degrades homosexuals, it is a message of intolerance. Am I insulting to the Muslim if I say that, or am I engaging the Muslim in a conversation about what these things mean in practice? If you believe that homosexuals should be put to death for homosexuality, or apostates should be put to death for homosexuality, we talk about that. Is that offensive to Muslims? It is not. So I think we should totally and completely move away from, when discussing beliefs and doctrines and traditions versus human beings, we should move away from such terminology as insults. I do not insult Muslims by questioning Islamic law. I honor them with reason.
Emma, let me bring you in and make a... Our next question comes from Rohan Venkatraman.
Good day, Ayaan. In your book, Heretic, you categorise the followers of Islam as extremists, dissidents, and the peaceful and observant majority. Each time there's an act by the extremists of violence or misogyny, there's often a debate surrounding the majority calling them out to act and referring them as guilty by silence. Do you think this is fair to call upon the peaceful majority to condemn these acts? And if so, what steps can be taken to curb such future acts of violence?
Ayaan.
I think that you have to see and appreciate diversity among Muslims as individuals, spread over several continents who speak different languages, different ages, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and different degrees in what they take and how much of Islam as a doctrine they observe. I think that if you say, and I try to address this in Heretic, if you say that as a Muslim, I object to some of the conduct of the Prophet Muhammad, then I categorize you as a modifier, because you're trying to say there is a discrepancy between what I believe in as a Muslim and what Muhammad orders me to do, or what is in the Quran, and I'd like to change that. That's the modifying. Muslim, I'm on their side. the Medina Muslims, the individuals who are engaged, they're organizing, they can be heads of state like Erdogan, they can be movements like the Muslim Brotherhood or Hizb ut-Tahrir. I think you are more familiar with that movement here in Australia, or they can just be individuals. I think those individuals should be engaged, and it is not a blanket condemnation of all Muslims to say, you know, we need to address such doctrines as jihad, as commanding right and forbidding wrong, as Sharia law, as this call to sacrifice your life for the hereafter when you don't really know if there is a hereafter, and obeying, you know, the one man, one book slogan. So to have this kind of conversations and debates with Muslims is to see them as equals, to see them as individuals endowed with reason. And it's the same kind of critical conversation you would have with Christians, with Jews, with Buddhists, with Marxists a while back, and with, you know, in Nazi Germany and afterwards with white supremacists who believe in National Socialism. Do not exempt Muslims from that kind of critical dialogue. Do not subject them to the bigotry of low expectations.
And before we move on, just give us a quick appraisal of what a reformation of Islam would look like. Would it require the overthrow of fundamentalist clerics in Iran and Saudi Arabia and other places?
It would require that, but I think what I believe in is, and here's why we keep going back to the freedom of expression, is the most effective way of overthrowing such power structures is through the freedom of speech. The one thing that these clerics fear and hate, it's that critical thinking and that critical discussion, and so they shut that down. Take a look at the Saudi young man who is blogging away and is questioning the power of the clergymen. They lock him up, they flog him, they are going to obviously kill him because they've accused him of apostasy. That is how much they hate critical thinking and the freedom of speech. You want to overthrow these people, you don't need to use violence. You need to question over and over again their logic, and their logic doesn't hold up to daylight.
Let me quickly go back to our questioner, Rohan, listening to this. Did that answer your question, or do you have a further...
So my question surrounds more around, every time an act of violence is committed by the extremists, is it fair to look upon the peaceful mob among the followers of Islam and question them as to why they don't condemn it? That was more of my question. Is it fair to look upon your neighbor who might be a Muslim and go, do you condemn this act of extremism committed in the US or in Great Britain or Paris?
I think it's not about being fair or unfair. I think we live in a world where people who identify themselves as Muslims invoke the Quran and invoke the Prophet Muhammad, and they go around killing people, shouting Allahu Akbar. And I think it is perfectly justified for those of us who don't do that to ask fellow Muslims, just pose the question, what on earth is this about? That is not Islamophobia, that is not unfair. If you share the philosophy, the religion, the background, the tradition, and that is posed, it is making an appeal on your citizenship, on your obligation to this community. And I don't think you should be offended by that. If you are, I think in this environment, it is okay to say, I'm not going to take part in this debate.
Let's Ned Gilson.
Hi, thanks very much. Ayaan, it's no exaggeration to say that you are a hero for feminists and free thinkers across the globe. But as a consequence of you breaking a taboo and criticising the doctrines of Islam, you've been condemned by many liberals. Are you at all sanguine about how liberals and progressives are approaching Islamic theocracy? Or do you feel that what Majid Nawaz calls regressive liberalism is too pervasive?
I will start with you, Ayaan, but we do want to hear from the other panellists.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Majid Nawaz is a British thinker. He's now become definitely a very good friend of mine. And he does address what the left does, which is to lump people together as Muslims and as various other groups and subject them to what we both call the bigotry of low expectations. It is perfectly fine to question any other religion and to criticize any other religion. Excuse me.
Bless you, even if you're an atheist.
Thank you. Thank you. But it's become increasingly difficult. And what we have done to Muslims in the West is that we only see them through this prism of victims and victimization. And these Medina Muslims, these individuals who want to indoctrinate them, they do present them as victims because they want to isolate them from the rest of society. So yes, I do think that it's not only important to address the extremists, the Medina Muslims, and their agenda, but how the left contributes to that agenda.
I think there are good reasons why people like myself, you know, white male Westerners, are rightly queasy about going in and aggressively criticising people from other cultures.
It's from Susie Latham in Preston, Victoria.
Ayaan, you say you're a women's rights advocate, yet you deny Muslim women agency and receive almost no support from them. Your support in Western countries has come from right-wing conservatives that benefit from you speaking when, as you have said, they would have been labelled racists. Why do you make life more difficult for Muslim women in Western countries by calling them slaves and submissive robots, and for women in Muslim countries by advocating military strikes on places like Iraq and Iran?
Let's go to this side of the panel, and Ayaan, we'll start with you, obviously. It's directed to you.
Well, I do have Muslim women as my friends and as my supporters. I have started a foundation in the United States of America, and we welcome women, young women, young girls, women of middle age, and here's what they complain about. Here's what they come to us for. They're subjected to forced marriages. They're running away from a forced marriage, and their children are taken away from them. They have no custody. They are subjected to women who see their own children being forced into marriage. They're subjected to female genital mutilation. They're enslaved. They're forced to wear the veil when they don't want to wear the veil. This is what is happening to Muslim women. And when you said that at times you feel squeamish about, you know, being a white man and in that culture, here's what I wish that white men and white women would not feel squeamish about. It is to protect the rights of the individuals within these communities and within these groups. If you have young girls who are subjected to forced marriage, it is not a marriage. It's an arranged rape. It's a forced rape, and I wish we were not squeamish about it. We were not squeamish about slavery. We were not squeamish about eradicating, you know, civil rights, apartheid, and I wish that that is one thing we would not be squeamish about.
Emma, let's bring you in.
Now, on the one about what you say, if you are, you know, a white woman or a white man, and what you can and cannot say, let's go back to that first question, which was, as citizens of the same nation state, if we share or purport to share the same destiny, then I don't think that you can hold on to the logic that only Muslims can criticize Islam, only Christians can criticize Christianity, and so on. We don't want a parallel society existing or consisting of all these fragmented communities, but we're all individuals. And I think if, in the name of Islam, liberal institutions and liberal rights are being threatened, then it is everyone's obligation, not just Muslims, to criticize that.
OK, remember, if you hear any doubtful claims, thank you.